Do you know Charlie Munger, who's...
Of course. He died recently, unfortunately. One of the greats.
So one of his rules that I absolutely love is this inversion rule. So basically...
Yeah, always invert.
Always invert, yeah. And I was writing about this in my newsletter. So he does the famous commencement speech at the University of Southern California, and he basically says... he's asked to do a talk to a kind of bug-eyed, wide-eyed American students. And he goes, this is how to live a life of misery. And I think the 5 things he's like, inhale alcohol and chemicals, be resentful and envious, be unreliable, and don't stand on the shoulders and do not stand on the shoulders of others, i.e. learn from others' mistakes. Do those 5 things and you'll live a life of misery. So the whole point is his famous quote is wisdom is prevention. So if you avoid those things, you will live a good life. And I've been thinking about that. So I've added some for myself, is I rush everywhere. So when I rush, I'm just like, I'm not enjoying my life, basically. So one of my things, if I rush everywhere. But I would love to apply this to brand building in food. So like, what would you say... if we're using the rule of inversion, what other ways a brand could absolutely fuck itself? So say we were trying to cannibal how could Coca-Cola essentially dismantle themselves with the inversion rules? Like, what were the things they'd have to do?
This is similar to a game that was invented. This is similar to a game that was invented by a guy called Jeremy Bullmore, I think, who was a great creative guy at the agency J. Walter Thompson. And he called this brandicide, which is...
I love that.
In order to discover what a brand is, one useful mode of inquiry is what you might call to decide what the brand isn't. And all I can remember is, you've got to remember this was the 1980s, and you had After Eight mints as a sort of premium after-dinner mint sold by Rowntree's in the little individual envelopes, you know that...
I know, I love them, yeah.
And... the question was, what would you do if you wanted to kill the After Eight brand? And the first suggestion was you introduce After Eight chewing gum. Okay, you move the brand in. And then someone decided they thought that actually an upmarket mint-flavoured chewing gum might actually do quite well. And then someone else suggested After Eight bubble gum. Okay, and that's the kind of piece of brandicide. You know, it's so totally inappropriate to what the brand is about. And what's interesting about McDonald's actually is that it has innovated significantly, but it's always gone to the adjacent possible. So the mistake that McDonald's hasn't made is it's introduced screen ordering and it's introduced table service, but it hasn't removed face-to-face ordering, and it hasn't removed order at the counter. Now, what a lot of supermarkets have done is they've gone, God, it's cheaper to actually have self-service checkout, self-checkout than it is to have people. So we're going to have really few tills and we're going to have loads and loads of self-service checkout. Okay. Now, I think, this is an example of where I think companies get it really badly wrong, which is there are whole areas of company decision-making which are made by procurement or by the finance function with no input from marketing, which... are made entirely on the basis of financial expediency with no consideration given for the customer experience. So an example of this is when you park at my local M&S. Now, M&S has got a lot of things right recently, and they're undoubtedly on a bit of a roll. The new chief executive, who comes from a very strong lifetime retailer, what
do you think they've got right? Like, because I know
quality of food, the clothing. They've finally started to crack clothing. I think they still make a few mistakes. I think the way in which they decorate and lay out the clothing stores is fundamentally inimical to selling premium goods. Okay? Yeah. There are certain rules in premium fashion, which is, if you're paying over the odds for something, you want carpets and you don't want industrial lighting above your head. And when you pay your 80 quid, you want a rope handle bag. And I think Marks and Spencer's could learn from that. There are certain just heuristic rules, that, you'll always notice this. The first rule of being an upmarket Turkish restaurant is you don't sell doner kebabs, right? Which slightly annoys me because I really like the doner kebab. I think it's a great thing. Yeah. But it's now, what happens at M&S in Sevenoaks is that no one with a marketing or customer focused mindset has any say in this decision. And someone says, who are we going to get to run the car park? Because we can't make the car park free, because if we do, people just park there all day and go shopping in Sevenoaks or work in Sevenoaks, and the car park will be full. So they obviously go to the person who offers the highest bid to manage the car park. Okay, if you let us collect the money, we'll pay you a certain amount of money to manage this car park. The person who offers the highest bid is almost certainly likely to be the person most ready to issue fines to people for overstaying. Or in this case, what happens is, now, bear in mind, I'm not criticising M&S here. I'm simply showing it as an exemplar of what even really good brands do, where they get it wrong by handing decisions out to people who are purely motivated by the financial side of the question and have no responsibility for the consumer experience. And that would be the people who put in lots and lots of self-checkout tills, okay, which has now led to an epidemic of shoplifting. Okay, yes. But those people can lay claim to the financial saving, but they're not around to be responsible for the adverse consequences. Apart from anything else, in Waitrose and Sevenoaks, quite a lot of people, it's a fairly minted area, do a whole weekly shop there. It's quite difficult to do a whole weekly shop in a self-checkout till.
Have you seen...
You need a trolley, you need a bloody... I do the self-scanning, but there are a lot of people who are over 60. They don't want to get an app and scanning your own groceries with a bloody mobile phone is a pain in the arse anyway, because you need 3 hands, okay? Now, in the M&S car park, you come in, you pay, you use the app to pay for an hour, and the app says you have an hour left. You drive out after precisely an hour, and then you get issued a fine through the post because number plate recognition. Why? Because the number plate recognition system judges your duration of parking from entry to exit, not from the moment you pay. Now, obviously, if you're a bit slow getting out of the car, you pay 2 or 3 minutes later than you actually enter the car park, right?
Yeah.
Now, in every single car park, whether it's pay and display, whether it's an app or whatever, which is normally policed by a human being, if you pay for an hour, you've got an hour from the moment you pay. Right? They don't count the 4 minutes you were dicking around finding the ticket machine or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But in this system, because it's done by ANPR, they'll issue a fine if you arrive, pay 3 minutes later, and then leave 60 minutes later. Now, locally, on my local next door, that's driving people apoplectic. That, for a long time, I think this is now, they've finally got rid of it. No, it may still be the case. In that same store, you needed £1 to have a trolley. Now, nobody carries fucking coins anymore, right? I do not have £1 on my person at this moment. I might have one in the car, if I remember. Those are the kind of utterly ridiculous things that even great brands do. Utterly ridiculous, because what you've got to remember is that even if 95% of your customers 95% of the time are really happy, if you enrage someone 3 times in a row, you lose a customer almost for life.
And so that's another back.
And they're not looking at the long-term consequences of doing what they've done. They're simply looking at the short-term cost savings. And that's the real way to kill any brand, which is to focus so narrowly on short-term financial expediency that you forget the fact that you're in a relationship. So that will be a case where, for example, a restaurant business, nobody expects, a personal welcome in a motorway service station. There are places like McDonald's which are relatively impersonal, okay? But failing to recognise people and just failing to recognise the nature of a relationship so that each transaction basically starts from scratch, that's one really big failing I think you can... I mean, the other one is simply by... anything you do that diminishes the... I'll go back to the scarf model, okay? There's this great model, neuroscientist David Rock, and the model of things that humans care about that aren't really quantified and aren't well understood by economists. It's SCARF, which stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. And people care about those things to the depth of their being. If you do something in a restaurant which is an affront to someone's status, effectively, that will arouse far more ire and likelihood of a boycott than having slightly bad food.
What are the other ones?
Status certainty.
So what does it mean by that?
That's kind of like predictability. A good example of certainty would be signs on the tube platform which say next tube 7 minutes. Okay,
in restaurants, so
we'd rather. I mean, okay. If we're at an airport and it says flight delayed 47 minutes, we go, yeah, flight's delayed 47 minutes. I'll go and have a drink, or I'll go to the lounge or whatever. Okay. If it just says delayed, we're in a state of uncertainty.
Yes,
we find that inordinately more painful.
Yes.
Than we've So quite often you can manage a downside in advance. I mean, there's a huge difference if you think about it between being handed a menu and being told that the hake's off. Okay, off the menu, and then versus ordering hake, and then 10 minutes later they come back and say the hake's off the menu.
Oh my God! I listened to a podcast with a Michelin star chef, and they go through their food icks, and that's one of the icks in terms of managing expectations.
It's like, totally fine. You hand someone a menu and say, "I'm terribly sorry."
But for some reason, apparently in loads of restaurants, they say that the staff know from day dot that there's no fucking hake, right? But they still go around the tables and say, order. The person orders, the expectation becomes here.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you'll go to the kitchen, come back.
I mean, the brilliant book, you must have read the book by Will Gadara called Unreasonable Hospitality.
So I tried to get him on the podcast, actually. And in terms of hospitality, because I asked...
That brilliant observation that the things you deliver that the person wasn't expecting...
Yeah.
That you have, in a sense, the mind of a game theorist with the customer, not the mind of a kind of rule follower.
What do you mean by the mind of a game theorist?
I loved the way in which he went to, one of the best restaurants in the world and said, okay, all of this was, as you'd expect, absolutely amazing, but where could we do better than them? We can't do better than them on the food because their food is already top notch. But he said, when I ordered coffee at the end of the meal, it was just bog standard coffee. And he went and appointed one of his staff as kind of like the coffee sommelier, basically.
Yes. Yeah.
And got in some massive, Pavoni cappuccino machine. He also appointed, I think, one of the waiters as their beer guy. Yeah. Because he said that all these restaurants wank on about wine endlessly.
Yeah.
But 20% of people prefer beer.
Yeah, we were talking about this last time.
And so there were these sort of craft breweries who are literally so delighted. They were more or less sending them free beer, I think, because they were so delighted that a leading New York restaurant had finally decided to take beer seriously.
But also I like about that book, he talks about the story.
I'd much rather have a conversation with a beer sommelier than the wine sommelier, because wine conversations are kind of wanky, aren't they? Whereas beer conversations...
Yeah, that's like the status game in like all its tomfoolery, isn't it?
You've never had Joe Fattorini?
He's coming on.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so I will give a pre-plug here for someone I consider one of the greatest exponents of, particularly of drink and behavioural science, in that he's utterly brilliant in his knowledge of both. And so he's fascinating on either topic, but when the two topics overlap, it's absolutely pure magic.
Yeah, well, because I think he lives in Stockholm now. So he was.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, he did something weird like that.
In fact, I'm going to message him after this. So he's coming on. But the other thing I like about what Will does is he talks about the story of remembering something about how like a significant fact. And he realizes the story of the couple who've been in New York, and they're in this Union Square.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And then he brings out, someone goes around the back and brings around one of those shitty hot dogs from the hot dog stand, goes to them and says, oh, here's a hot dog, but they put it on like a nice plate.
That's it.
It doesn't make sense. It's like a juxtaposition of a shitty hot dog from a burger stand with sweaty onions on a Michelin-style plate. But at that moment of magic, you can't create. Again, in terms back to the self-checkout thing and sort of the perversity of it, do you know Booth's, a retailer up north?
Yeah.
In total, a bit like the coffee thing of like, okay, what's the Achilles heel in our competitors, or like, where are they? What's their strength that could be their weakness? So Booth's, I think, back in the last year, got rid of all self checkouts.
Interesting.
And I think they're only 30. They're about 20 stores all up north.
They make their own food, because I've got a vague memory that they sell to Amazon Fresh. Is that right? That I think you get Booth's kind of
what? Yeah.
They've got their own brand of certain foodstuffs.
Why? What? Sorry. One more. We'll go back to the. Can we just go back to the scarf thing? So we've done status, consistency,
autonomy. Now, an example of that would be people prefer a table they've chosen to a table that's imposed on them, even if it's the same table. Okay, so one nice thing a restaurant can do is say, where would you rather sit? Or you can have any of these 3 tables. People are just happier with that. Not because necessarily they get to choose the table. Well, sorry, not because they wouldn't have chosen the table you would have allocated them anyway, but simply because the act of making the choice you like something you've chosen more than something that's imposed on you.
Yeah.
Okay, even if it's the same thing. Okay,
Yeah.
It's why we used to work with Ford, and Ford always had lower customer satisfaction figures than a few competitors. And we had to explain that, and they got annoyed because they couldn't get this satisfaction figure above a certain amount, even though they'd made the cars better and better and better. And we had to explain it's because so many of your customers are fleet customers. They haven't chosen a Ford. They've been told they're driving a Ford, and it's not the same. Even if you would have chosen a Ford, you won't like a car as much if your employer tells you that's the car you've got to drive versus if you've chosen that car. So that's autonomy. People don't like being railroaded or tram-railed. Relatedness, you could actually, a better phrase might be reciprocality or relationship, which is people don't like a series of standalone transactions. They like an acknowledgement of their past custom, and so treating regular customers differentially better than you treat treat people who are just in off the street. And at scale that's a loyalty program perhaps, but in an independent restaurant it's simple recognition, simple as that. And then fairness is fairness. What really pisses people off is that those people got their food first but they ordered after we did. Those kind of things really, really upset people.
Yes.
Now it might be that the thing you've ordered is a completely different thing. But again, you can overcome that by pre-warning people in advance, perhaps.